My cheating fiancé texted a week before the wedding. Remind me of the date? I replied, forget it. I canceled everything and turned the deposit into a freedom party. Minutes later, his dad called furious when his card got declined. My name is Aria Fletcher. I'm 32 years old. And a week ago, I thought I was about to marry the man I'd been with for nearly 5 years. I believed our wedding would be the turning point where all the exhaustion, the endless planning, the compromises, and the second-guessing would finally be worth it. Instead, it became the week where everything I thought I knew crumbled in my hands like dry paper. It started on a Tuesday afternoon. T-7 days until the wedding. I was in my small Brooklyn apartment surrounded by chaos. Seating charts covered the coffee table. Half-signed vendor contracts lay in uneven stacks. My laptop buzzed with unanswered emails from the florist, the DJ, the photographer. My head was pounding from lack of sleep. Planning this wedding felt less like joy and more like a second full-time job. One I hadn't applied for. Nathan, my fiancé, was supposed to be my partner in this. Instead, he drifted further away with each passing month. He came home late with vague excuses about working overtime at the consulting firm. He guarded his phone like it held nuclear codes. Every time I tried to voice my worry, he dismissed me. Aria, you're overthinking again. It's just stress. Or worse, he'd turn it around, accuse me of being paranoid, of creating problems out of nothing. But I wanted to believe him. I wanted the fairy tale ending I'd been promised. So I convinced myself it was just cold feet, just nerves, just me being insecure. The wedding wasn't just ours either. His parents, Richard and Eleanor Ashford, treated it like their personal social showcase. They were wealthy, sophisticated, and relentless. Richard owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across the tri-state area. Eleanor sat on the boards of 3 different charities and never let anyone forget it. They wanted grandeur, perfection, spectacle. Their guest list was stacked with investors, old friends from their country club, society figures whose names appeared in the style section of the Times. Every detail was about their image, not my love story. And somehow, I ended up footing most of the bill. That was my first mistake. My second was adding Nathan as an authorized user on my credit card, strictly for wedding expenses. I told myself. I should have known better. That Tuesday afternoon, as I was trying to finalize the music schedule with our DJ, my phone buzzed. A text from Nathan. For a second, I thought maybe he was finally checking in about the centerpieces or the first dance song. Maybe even something sweet, an I love you, to ease the tension that had been building between us like a wall of ice. I unlocked my phone. What I saw knocked the breath out of me. Hey, random question LOL. But remind me of the date for the wedding again. I read it once. Then twice. Then a third time, praying the words would rearrange themselves into something less absurd. But they didn't. My heart didn't just sink. It plummeted straight through the floor. The room tilted. My stomach lurched like I was standing on a cliff edge with no ground beneath me. A week away from the day that was supposed to define our future, and he didn't know the date. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't a bad joke. It was the final confirmation of something my gut had been screaming at me for a year. Nathan wasn't here with me. Not really. I stumbled into the kitchen, gripping the counter until my knuckles whitened. My pulse hammered so hard I thought I might faint. Maybe it's a joke, I whispered to myself. Maybe he's teasing. Maybe he's just distracted. But even as the words left my lips, I knew. Deep down, I knew. For 5 years, I had respected his privacy. His phone, his passwords, his space. I never crossed that line. But standing there with that text burning through my hand, respect felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. Our shared iPad sat charging in the living room. His phone was synced to it, messages, emails, everything. My hand shook so badly I had to type his password 3 times before it opened. And then there it was. A message thread. A long one. With a woman named Lauren. I scrolled. My breath catching with every flick of my finger. Weeks, no months, of plans for secret meetups, hotel reservations in Connecticut, photos I'll never be able to erase from my mind. But it wasn't the images that broke me. It was the words. One message from Lauren. Sent the night before. Are you really going through with this wedding? Just leave her already. His reply less than an hour before he texted me. I have to. It's too complicated to explain, but after, it'll be our time. I promise. I dropped the iPad onto the couch as if it had burned me. The sickness in my stomach twisted into something sharp, something colder. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't stress. This was betrayal, deliberate and cruel. My first reaction was panic. My second was heartbreak so deep I thought it might kill me. But then something inside me shifted. The chaos in my chest cooled, crystallizing into clarity. The damage was already done. The storm had already destroyed everything. All that was left was to deal with the wreckage. My hands were steady now. First, I replied to Nathan's text. My fingers moved with surgical precision across the screen. Don't worry about it. Then I called the venue. The historic riverside estate with its marble ballroom and manicured gardens overlooking the Hudson River. The one that had cost me a small fortune in deposits. My voice was calm, almost too calm, as I told the manager, Patricia, that the wedding was cancelled. She expressed sympathy, then gently reminded me the $25,000 deposit was non-refundable. But she did mention I had a venue credit valid for a year. I thanked her, said I'd keep it in mind, and hung up. Second, I called my credit card company. I told the representative to remove Nathan immediately, that his access was revoked. Effective now, his card would decline. A new card, new number, was on its way to me. By the time I hung up, my breath was even, my pulse steady. The heartbreak was still there, yes, but buried beneath it was something else. Resolved that I knew the storm had only just begun. Nathan, his parents, the entire facade, they would come at me with everything they had. But for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. The first call came less than 20 minutes after I revoked Nathan's access to my card. My phone lit up with his father's name. Richard Ashford. He wasn't just Nathan's father. He was the kind of man who believed his voice could command the weather to change, who thought his money meant his opinions were facts. I could almost hear the fury radiating through the phone before I even picked up. Arya, what in God's name is going on? It wasn't a question. It was an accusation, sharp and booming. I held the phone an inch from my ear. Hello, Richard. My tone was stripped of any warmth. The wedding is cancelled. There was a strangled pause, then an explosion. Cancelled? Don't be ridiculous. Eleanor's card was just declined at Bergdorf's. She was paying for Nathan's final tuxedo fitting. You're trying to humiliate us, aren't you? I closed my eyes, pressing my lips into a thin line. No stunt. There is no wedding. That card was for wedding expenses. There are no wedding expenses anymore. I closed the account. You can't just, his voice cracked, a sputter of disbelief. Do you understand? The announcements have been made. We have people flying in from London, from Tokyo, from Los Angeles. You do not get to cancel this. Yes, I do, I said softly and then firmer. It's done. Before he could spew another word, I ended the call. The silence that followed was deafening, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring because your body is bracing for another blow. I stood by the window, looking out at the Brooklyn Bridge lit up against the night sky. And for a moment I couldn't feel anything at all. Just emptiness. But the storm hadn't even begun. The next 24 hours were a siege. Calls, voicemails, texts from Nathan, from his parents, from unknown numbers I assumed were their friends or lawyers doing reconnaissance. Each one more frantic, more aggressive than the last. My phone buzzed so constantly that I finally set it to do not disturb and placed it face down on the table. At 11 p.m., there was pounding at my door. Arya, open up, please. Nathan's voice, raw and frantic. I sat on the couch, staring at the shadows on the wall, my knees pulled up to my chest. The performance began, first pleading. Arya, baby, please talk to me. Just open the door. We can figure this out. Then confusion. I don't understand why you're doing this. This is crazy. Just open up. Then anger, fists hammering harder against the wood. You can't just lock me out of my own life. Do you hear me? And finally, the sobs, the manipulative, theatrical kind that had once tugged at my heart. You're breaking my heart, Arya. How can you be so cruel? I pressed my hands over my ears. I didn't move. Eventually, after nearly an hour, the pounding faded. The footsteps retreated. The silence returned. But silence didn't mean peace. The next morning, an email from Eleanor waited in my inbox. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. An art form she had perfected, cloaked in concern, dripping with venom. The opening lines pretended at sympathy. We are deeply worried about you, Arya. Clearly, you're under tremendous stress, and we fear it's affecting your judgment. But the mask slipped quickly. The middle paragraphs burned with rage. how I was humiliating their family, how I was causing significant emotional distress to Nathan, how I was creating a financial disaster of epic proportions. And then the final blow. I don't know what's gotten into you, Arya, but this selfish tantrum has gone on long enough. You are a grown woman. You need to fix what you broke. Our family's reputation is at stake. My selfish tantrum that I stared at the words until they blurred. That was the moment I understood. They weren't panicking about Nathan's heartbreak or even about me. They were panicking about themselves. Their image. Their carefully constructed facade. They were launching a PR campaign, and I was the villain they intended to crucify to save their story. By noon, my sister Brielle showed up at my apartment carrying takeout bags like armor. Behind her was my best friend, Zoe, balancing 2 bottles of wine. Emergency provisions, Zoe announced, kicking the door closed with her boot. The moment I saw them, my chest cracked open. Tears I had been holding back for 36 hours poured out. Brielle pulled me into her arms, whispering, "You don't have to carry this alone." We sat cross-legged on the living room floor. Cartons of pad thai and dumplings spread out between us. Wine poured into mismatched mugs. For the first time, I let myself say it all out loud. The text, the affair, the fraud, the sheer audacity of it all. They didn't just offer sympathy. They burned with anger for me. Zoe slammed her mug down. You can't just hide from them, Arya. They're trying to rewrite history, paint you as some hysterical runaway bride. You need to take control of the story. Brielle nodded fiercely. And what about that venue credit? That's 20 grand just sitting there. Don't let them win by letting it go to waste. I frowned. What am I supposed to do with it? Throw a party for myself? Yes, Brielle said flatly. Zoe grinned, her eyes flashing. A freedom party. Celebrate the fact that you saved yourself from the worst mistake of your life. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. At first, the idea seemed insane. Who throws a party on the ashes of their wedding? But the longer I sat there, watching their determined faces, the more it lodged in me like a spark refusing to die. Maybe it wasn't insane. Maybe it was exactly what I needed. The morning after Brielle and Zoe's late-night pep talk, I woke up with a pounding headache, not just from the wine, but from the avalanche of thoughts that refused to let me sleep. My phone was still buzzing with muted notifications, but I ignored it. For the first time in days, I didn't feel like prey. I felt deliberate that I pulled on a sweater, made myself coffee strong enough to strip paint, and stared at the venue manager's number saved in my phone. My thumb hovered for a long moment before I pressed call. Patricia answered on the second ring, her voice calm and professional. Good morning, Arya. How are you holding up? Surviving, I said truthfully. I wanted to ask about that venue credit. She hesitated, careful. Yes, you have $20,000 on file, valid for a year. Did you want me to reserve something for you? I closed my eyes and pictured what Brielle had said, what Zoe had demanded. Take it back. Celebrate your freedom. Yes, I said. My voice didn't shake this time. Do you have any openings 3 weeks from now? She clicked her keyboard. The original date is, as you can imagine, still booked. But 3 weeks later, yes, I can give you the full ballroom. Book it, I said, the words sliding out like a knife leaving its sheath. All right, Miss Fletcher. You're all set. When I hung up, I realized I was smiling. Not a joyful smile. Something sharper, something alive. Fueled by that decision, I turned to the next battlefield. My finances. If Nathan and his family wanted to paint me as unstable, then I would arm myself with truth. Receipts, records, facts. The kind of evidence that couldn't be spun into hysteria. That I pulled 6 months of credit card statements and spread them across my desk. At first, the numbers blurred together. Columns of dates and totals. But as I went line by line, patterns emerged. Thousands at luxury spas. Designer boutiques on Madison Avenue. Upscale restaurants in Tribeca, none of which had anything to do with a wedding. I highlighted them one by one, my pen pressing harder each time until the paper nearly tore. Then I saw it. A charge 3 weeks ago. $9,000 at a high-end furniture gallery in Soho. My pulse quickened. I picked up the phone and called the number listed. Fletcher Residence. I asked when the clerk answered. Yes, Miss Fletcher, she replied cheerfully. The dining set. It's a beautiful piece. Your mother-in-law, Eleanor, said it was a surprise wedding gift for your new home. Delivery is scheduled for the week after your wedding. The words felt like acid in my ears. Eleanor had bought herself a $9,000 dining room set with my card and planned to present it as her gift to me. The audacity was staggering. The sheer gall of it made me laugh, a cold, humorless laugh that scared even me. "Cancel the order," I said, my voice steady but heat rising in my chest. "Effective immediately." "Of course," the clerk said, puzzled. "Should we issue the refund to the same card?" "Yes," I said, and hung up before I said anything I couldn't take back. That I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the printout of the $9,000 charge. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was theft, exploitation. A systematic draining of my resources orchestrated by the family I was supposed to be joining. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. They never saw me as part of their family. I was a wallet. A convenient, naive stepping stone to finance their perfect social pageant. The affair was cruel, yes. The lies were devastating. But this was calculated. And for the first time since Nathan's text, my heartbreak cooled into something razor sharp. That night, Brielle came over again, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, legal pads tucked under her arm. "You look like you're about to go to war," she said when she saw me surrounded by spreadsheets and receipts. "I am," I replied simply. She sat down, grabbed a pen, and started helping me organize the charges. One by one, we created columns: legitimate wedding expenses versus personal indulgences. The second column grew longer and longer until the total made us both whistle under our breath. Zoe joined us later, plopping on the couch with pizza. "So, what's the plan, General?" she teased as I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion tugging at my bones, but there was fire in my voice. "They think they can smear me, drain me, and walk away. But I have proof. And I'm done playing nice." Zoe's grin was wicked. "Now you're speaking my language." By midnight, I had a plan forming in my head, not the impulsive, scorched earth revenge I had fantasized about in the first hours of heartbreak. This was different. This was precise. That if Richard and Eleanor wanted to protect their reputation more than anything, then I would make their reputation the bargaining chip. As I stared at the growing mountain of evidence, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Control. They had underestimated me. They thought I would break quietly, that shame and humiliation would keep me silent. They were wrong. The truth was on my side. The receipts were mine. And I was about to turn the wreckage they left me with into my sharpest weapon. Why the following weekend, my apartment looked less like a home and more like a war room. Papers stacked high across my dining table. Sticky notes marking timelines. Highlighter streaks screaming from receipts. It was the kind of chaos that, for the first time in weeks, made sense to me. Each receipt was a memory of manipulation. Each statement was a record of deceit. And when arranged carefully, they told a story that Richard and Eleanor could never spin their way out of. Brielle sat across from me, her pen tapping impatiently against her notebook. "All right, let's go through this one more time. Spreadsheet 1. I slid the first document toward her. Inventory of wedding gifts delivered to my apartment. Everything from Nathan's side of the family and their friends. Item, sender retail value. Total comes out to just over $30,000. Zoe, sprawled on my couch with her laptop, whistled. "That's a lot of crystal bowls and monogrammed silverware." "Exactly," I said. "Every single one of those gifts technically belongs to me, because they were sent to my address. But etiquette demands they go back to the senders if the wedding's off." Brielle nodded. "So you either return them quietly or—" I finished for her. "I returned them with a note. A polite, factual note explaining the reason. Nathan's infidelity and the misuse of my finances." Zoe sat up, eyes glinting. "Ouch. That's surgical, embarrassing them one donor at a time." I didn't smile, but my chest tightened with grim satisfaction. Spreadsheet 2. Brielle prompted that I slid the second file over. This one was heavier, darker. Every personal non-refundable expense I incurred, backed by receipts, texts, and emails. Total, $24,750. She scanned it, her lips pursed. "This is airtight, Aria." The $5,000 band Eleanor insisted on. The ice sculpture of their golden retriever. What was that? $2,500. The $9,000 dining set she tried to pass off as a gift. Plus the plane tickets you covered for Nathan's cousins flying in from California. Zoe leaned over her shoulder. "Jesus, they bled you dry." I clenched my jaw. Not anymore. The letter came next. Drafting it was strangely cathartic. Every sentence was a blade. Honed carefully. It began calm, professional. Richard and Eleanor, I am in possession of numerous wedding gifts from your friends and family. Proper etiquette requires these gifts be returned to the senders. Each will be accompanied by a personalized note from me, thanking them for their generosity and factually explaining the reason for the cancellation. Nathan's infidelity and the significant misuse of my finances. I paused, reread the words, and felt the sting of truth steady me. The next paragraph cut deeper. Enclosed, you will also find a detailed accounting of the expenses I incurred at your direct request. The total stands at $24,750. I have emails and texts documenting each demand. And then the ultimatum. You have 10 business days to wire the full amount to my account. If you comply, I will return the gifts to you in a single, discreet transfer with no explanatory notes. My silence, in other words, that if you refuse, I will return the gifts directly to their original senders with notes attached. The choice is yours. I signed it, my hand steady. Aria Fletcher. Brielle looked up from proofreading, her brows raised. This isn't revenge, Aria. This is checkmate. Zoe grinned, teeth flashing. And the best part? It's not illegal. It's etiquette. Strategic, vicious etiquette. A hollow laugh escaped me. Exactly. They value reputation above all else. Let's see how much that's worth to them in dollars. On Monday morning, I walked to the post office with the letter tucked neatly inside a certified envelope. The clerk weighed it, stamped it, and slid it into the outgoing bin with a casual flick. I stared at the bin a moment longer than necessary. My hands were cold. But not from fear. From finality. When the clerk handed me the tracking slip, it felt like a trigger being pulled. The ball was now in their court. The next 2 days were a strange limbo. I went through the motions of work at the marketing agency, drank coffee on autopilot, and ignored the constant buzz of my muted phone. But inside I was bracing, waiting for the counterattack. It didn't take long. On Wednesday, my mother called. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the tension underneath. Aria, I just got off the phone with Eleanor. Of course. What did she say? That you've had some sort of breakdown. That you're confused, emotional, lashing out. She was crying, begging me to talk some sense into you. My mother's voice hardened. But I told her I already knew the truth. That if she wanted to resolve this, she should speak with you directly. And then I hung up. For the first time in weeks, I laughed without bitterness. My mom, the quiet woman who usually avoided confrontation, had shut Eleanor down with surgical precision. She didn't scream? I asked. Oh, she wanted to, my mom said. But she's terrified. She knows you have the evidence. That's why she's trying to appeal to me instead. Later that night, a long text from Nathan arrived. It was a novel. Paragraphs of desperation. I know I messed up, but I love you. My parents are going crazy. You're destroying our family. Lauren meant nothing. Please don't do this to them. Send the gifts back to me. We can figure out the money later. Don't humiliate them like this. I read it 3 times. Not because I doubted my decision, but because I was struck by how every line was about them. Their family. Their reputation. Their panic. Not me. Not us. Not once did I set my phone down and didn't reply. By Friday, the certified letter had been signed for. I got the email confirmation. My chest tightened. The countdown had begun. 10 business days. 10 days until they either paid for their sins or watched me dismantle their facade piece by piece. The days after I mailed the letter were some of the strangest of my life. Outwardly, everything looked calm. I went to work, answered polite emails, kept my phone on silent. But inside I was counting down. Day 1, silence. Day 2, silence. By the 3rd day, the silence broke. My mom called again, and I could tell instantly something was off in her voice. Aria, Eleanor called me again. I closed my eyes. What now? This time, Eleanor hadn't been screaming. She had been crying, full dramatic sobs that my mother said were loud enough to distort the line. She spun the story differently this time. Said I was confused, that I was throwing away my future over a misunderstanding. Begged my mom to talk some sense into me. And what did you say? I asked. My mom let out a breath. I told her I already knew everything. That you had the proof. And I told her not to call this number again. My throat tightened. You really said that? I did. Aria, you're stronger than you think. They're scared. I could hear it in her voice. Day 5 brought another message from Nathan. A wall of text at midnight, desperate and contradictory that I know I messed up, but I love you. My parents are panicking. You're destroying our family. Lauren meant nothing. Please don't do this to them. Please don't ruin their lives over a mistake. Send the gifts back quietly. We'll figure out the money later. Don't humiliate them. That I sat on the edge of my bed, reading and rereading. His concern wasn't for me. Not once did he ask about my pain. Every sentence was about them, his parents, their reputation, their image. That I put the phone face down on the nightstand. I didn't reply. By day 7, Eleanor tried again, this time through a mutual friend. A carefully orchestrated plea wrapped in pity. She just wants to talk to you, the friend said gently over the phone. She says this has all been blown out of proportion. I almost laughed. Blown out of proportion? As if discovering your fiancé's affair and your future in-laws siphoning thousands from you was a minor inconvenience. She's not worried about me, I said coldly. She's worried about her reputation. The friend fell silent, and I knew she understood. Day 9 arrived. By then, the anticipation had morphed into a heavy weight in my chest. I tried to distract myself, took long walks through Prospect Park, reorganized my bookshelves, even cooked a full meal for the first time in weeks. But underneath it all, the countdown ticked. That afternoon, I sat by the window sipping lukewarm tea when my phone buzzed with a new email alert. Subject: incoming wire transfer. My breath caught. Hands trembling, I opened it. There it was, $24,750 deposited into my account. For a long time, I just stared at the screen. I expected a rush of triumph, some burst of satisfaction. But what I felt instead was finality. Heavy, profound finality. They hadn't paid because they cared about me. They hadn't paid because they wanted to make amends. They had paid for one reason: to protect themselves. To buy my silence. That I closed the email and sat in the quiet. Tears pricked at my eyes, but they weren't tears of grief anymore. They were something else, a strange mix of relief and mourning. That I had won. But winning didn't feel like victory. It felt like the closing of a door I could never open again. The following day, Brielle handled the logistics of the exchange. Richard and Eleanor were instructed to bring a truck to a storage facility near my apartment in Williamsburg. I refused to see them. I couldn't stomach it. Instead, Brielle and Zoe oversaw the handoff. When they returned later, their faces were pale. "You're lucky you didn't go," Brielle said quietly, setting her keys on the counter. "What happened?" I asked. "They didn't speak a word," Zoe said. "Not to us, not to each other. They just moved like robots, loading the boxes into the truck. Their faces, Aria, it was like they'd been carved out of stone." "Nathan was there," Brielle added. "Sitting in the cab. He didn't get out. Just stared straight ahead like a ghost." I exhaled slowly. A part of me wanted to feel pity, but pity was dangerous. It was the crack that let manipulation back in. So I shoved it down. That night, I opened a new savings account. I transferred the $24,750 and labeled it something simple: escape fund. Not revenge money. Not hush money. Freedom money. As I sat there staring at the label, I realized something. This wasn't about punishing them anymore. Not really. It was about reclaiming myself. They had tried to define me as weak, as hysterical, as a wallet to drain. But now I was defining myself. The storm had come and gone. They had screamed. They had begged. They had manipulated. And in the end they paid. They lost. And I had survived. 3 weeks after the storm had settled, I walked back into the ballroom that was supposed to host my wedding. The marble floors gleamed under the chandeliers. The same chandeliers I had once imagined casting golden light on Nathan's tuxedo, on my dress, on a first dance that would never happen. For a moment, the sight nearly broke me. A ghost of what was supposed to be hung in the air. But then laughter echoed across the room. Real laughter. Raw, unfiltered joy. Brielle and Zoe were directing the caterers, rearranging tables, making the space feel alive again. Instead of stiff centerpieces and ice sculptures shaped like golden retrievers, there were wildflowers in mismatched vases. Instead of a guest list curated by Richard and Eleanor, the people here were mine.my people. Friends who had seen me through college exams, through job interviews, through heartbreaks long before Nathan. Family members who knew me not as a bride-to-be, but as Aria, the stubborn, sometimes reckless, fiercely loyal woman who had finally chosen herself. This wasn't a wedding. This was a reclamation. When I stepped further in, applause broke out. Someone had hung a banner that read in bold letters, "Here's to Aria, free at last." I laughed in spite of myself, shaking my head. "Oh my God, you didn't." Zoe winked, handing me a glass of champagne. "We absolutely did. Deal with it." The room filled slowly, each person bringing not obligation but genuine affection. My coworkers who had quietly covered my shifts during the chaos. Old friends who had driven hours just to hug me. Even neighbors who had slipped encouraging notes under my door during those dark days. Everywhere I turned, there were faces smiling. Not because they wanted to be seen, but because they wanted me to feel seen. The night unfolded not like a rager but like a warm gathering. Music played. No DJ, just a playlist Zoe had cobbled together, full of songs we used to scream in the car during road trips. People danced, but it wasn't choreographed. It was messy, joyful, real. And in between I caught myself breathing. Really breathing. At one point, Brielle pulled me aside near the balcony that overlooked the Hudson River. "You realize what you did, right?" she asked softly. I raised a brow. "Cancelled a wedding and threw myself a pity party?" She shook her head, smiling. "No. You saved yourself. You looked at a sinking ship and refused to go down with it. That takes more courage than you realize." Her words sank into me like medicine. For so long, I had carried the shame of being cheated on, of being manipulated, of being made to feel small. But tonight, I felt none of that. Tonight, I felt tall. Near the end of the evening, Zoe clinked her glass for attention. All right. Our girl needs to give a toast." The crowd cheered, voices warm and insistent. My heart pounded. I wasn't a natural speaker, but something inside told me this was my moment. That I lifted my champagne glass and let the room quiet. "When I booked this ballroom months ago," I began, my voice carrying over the soft music, "I thought it would be the happiest night of my life. I thought I would be walking into a future built on trust, on family, on love." I paused, letting the silence stretch. Faces turned toward me, waiting. But sometimes life gives you a gift wrapped in fire. Sometimes what looks like the worst day of your life is actually the day you get free. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. I steadied my breath, speaking from the marrow of my bones. I lost a fiancé. I lost in-laws. I lost the version of my life I thought I wanted. But I gained something more important. I gained the truth. And I gained all of you, the people who remind me what love actually looks like. My throat tightened. I raised my glass higher. So tonight isn't about betrayal. Tonight is about gratitude. About friendship. About choosing yourself even when it terrifies you. Here's to freedom. And here's to never settling for less than the love we deserve. The room erupted. Glasses clinked. Voices roared. And for the first time in months, I felt light. Not the fragile light of denial, but the solid, glowing kind that comes when you finally set down a weight you were never meant to carry. Later that night, when the music softened and the crowd thinned, I stood alone at the edge of the dance floor. The chandeliers glittered above me. The same ballroom where my life was supposed to begin had instead become the place where I reclaimed it. And strangely, I didn't mourn what could have been, because what I had now felt far more real. In the weeks that followed, whispers trickled back to me. Nathan and Lauren had moved in together. An act of defiance. A desperate attempt to prove that their betrayal had been worth it. But reality doesn't bend to fantasies for long. They fight all the time. A friend confided over coffee at our usual spot in Park Slope. Neighbors say they scream at each other in the hallway. Lauren accuses him of hiding things. And Nathan, well, he hasn't changed. I tried not to revel in it, but a part of me couldn't help it. The man who once told her after the wedding, "It'll be our time," was now giving her the same evasions, the same guarded silences, the same excuses he'd given me. Patterns don't vanish just because the players changed. As for Richard and Eleanor, their downfall was quieter but sharper. The very people they had tried to impress, those society friends they valued more than honesty, began to distance themselves. At dinner parties, no one wanted to ask about the cancelled wedding. At charity galas, whispers followed them like shadows. They had paid for my silence, yes. But silence doesn't erase suspicion. And in the world they lived in, suspicion was poison. Meanwhile, my life, broken and patched together, started to look different. Therapy became part of my routine. At first, I resisted. Sitting in a room unraveling the knot of my past 5 years felt unbearable. But slowly, I began to see the threads for what they were. Not signs of my failure, but proof of how much I had endured. Some days, the memories still ambushed me. The text from Nathan. The photo messages on the iPad. The way Eleanor's email had called me hysterical. On those days, I let myself grieve. I reminded myself that healing wasn't a straight line. But other days, I felt strong. I felt the edges of myself sharpening again. The woman I had been before Nathan, before the manipulation, before the weight of their expectations, she was still here. She had just been buried. The escape fund became my symbol of that strength. One evening, I sat at my desk staring at the savings account balance. $24,750. It wasn't just money. It was justice crystallized. Proof that I had survived and fought back, that I booked a trip. 2 weeks in Colorado in the mountains. No cell service, no obligations. Just me, solid ground, and silence that belonged to me. When the plane landed and I stepped out into crisp mountain air, I felt something I hadn't in years. Freedom so vast it almost scared me that I hiked until my legs burned. I stood on cliffs where the world stretched endless beneath me. And with each step, each breath, the past felt farther away. There, surrounded by nothing but stone and sky, I whispered to myself, "You are not broken. You are free." Still, the scars remained. I would never forget the moment I read Nathan's text. The moment my stomach dropped and my world split open. I would never forget the hollow look on his face through the truck window as his parents loaded the wedding gifts. I would never forget the way Richard and Eleanor moved like robots, cold and furious. But the scars didn't define me. They were reminders, warnings, lessons carved into me with painful precision. And above all, they reminded me that I had chosen myself. One night, back from my trip, I sat on my balcony with a journal in my lap. I started writing, not about the betrayal, not about the financial manipulation, but about the small moments of survival. The way Brielle's arms had held me together that night on the floor with takeout and wine. The way Zoe had made me laugh when laughter felt impossible. The way my mother, soft-spoken and gentle, had told Eleanor never to call again. Those were the moments that saved me. Those were the real gifts. And as I wrote, I realized something. For all the pain Nathan and his family had caused, they hadn't taken the most important thing. They hadn't taken my capacity for love. Not romantic love, but real love. Love rooted in loyalty, honesty, and truth. Maybe someday, when I was ready, I would open myself to that again. But for now, I was content. Content with the freedom I had fought for. Content with the scars that told my story. Content with the silence I had earned. That night, I closed the journal and whispered into the quiet. I am not their villain. I am not their victim. I am me. And I survived. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman to tell my story to strangers. For so long, I believed silence was safer. That if I kept my head down, if I endured quietly, the storm would pass. But storms don't pass just because you refuse to look at the sky. They pass when you survive them. And I did survive. That it's been months since that night I stood on a cliff in Colorado, whispering to myself that I was free. Months since the ballroom echoed with laughter that was mine, not borrowed, not demanded. Months since Nathan's name stopped living on my tongue like a wound. Some days, the past still lingers. I'll catch myself flinching at the sound of a notification, half expecting it to be another manipulative message. Or I'll walk past a bridal shop window and feel a sharp tug in my chest. Healing isn't linear. The scars don't vanish. But scars don't mean you're broken. They mean you healed. Therapy taught me that. Sitting in a quiet room, unraveling 5 years of love that was never love at all. I learned how easily trust can be weaponized. How people like Richard and Eleanor craft illusions so carefully that you mistake control for care. That I also learned something more important. That I had ignored my own voice for too long. My instincts had whispered, then pleaded, then screamed, and I buried them under excuses. Because I wanted the dream. Because I wanted to believe. Now I listen. To the small voice in my chest that says, "This doesn't feel right." To the tightening in my stomach that warns me when something is off. To the freedom of choosing myself. Even when it terrifies me. As for Nathan, I don't think of him with anger anymore. At least not every day. Anger is exhausting, and he isn't worth that much of me. What I feel now is pity. He traded a life with someone who would have fought for him, forgiven him, built with him, for secrets, for lies, for a hollow fantasy. He traded loyalty for a thrill. And in the end, he's left with the same patterns, the same restless evasions, the same flaws that broke us. Lauren isn't his salvation. She's just his repetition. And maybe that's punishment enough. Richard and Eleanor have gone quiet, their reputations salvaged in fragments but never fully recovered. I hear their names sometimes in passing, always followed by a pause, a lowered voice. You heard what happened, right? For people who once measured their worth by how brightly their name sparkled in society circles, that's a death sentence that I didn't have to destroy them. I only had to let the truth exist. And the truth left to breathe is devastating on its own for me. My life is not a fairy tale ending. There's no sudden romance swooping in to heal me. No Hollywood montage where everything falls neatly into place. That my story isn't about replacing what I lost. It's about realizing I never truly lost anything worth keeping. The woman I was before Nathan, the woman who loved fiercely, who dreamed boldly, who trusted too much, she's still here. But now she's tempered, sharper, wiser. I don't regret loving. I don't regret believing. What I regret is silencing myself for so long. That will never happen again. Sometimes, late at night, I still think of the ballroom, of the chandeliers casting golden light over faces I trusted, over the man who was supposed to be mine. And then I remember the night of the freedom party, when those same chandeliers shone down on laughter, on loyalty, on real love. The same room. Two different truths. It reminds me that places, like people, aren't cursed. They're just chapters. And it's up to us how we close them. Today, I'm closing this chapter. The escape fund is still there, though it has transformed. It's not just money. It's a promise to myself. A reminder that I will never again let anyone make me small. That I will always have the means and the courage to walk away. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it isn't a courtroom victory or a public shaming. Sometimes justice is quiet, meticulous, and devastating in its precision. My justice was spreadsheets, certified letters, a wire transfer, and a freedom party under crystal chandeliers. If there's one thing I want anyone to take from my story, it's this: listen to yourself. Trust the voice in your chest. Don't silence it for the sake of love or family or appearances. The people who truly love you will never demand that silence. And sometimes the bravest, hardest, most powerful thing you can do is walk away. As I write these last words, the sun is rising outside my window. The city hums awake below me, but up here, there's only light spilling across the floor. I close the journal, set down my pen, and let the silence stretch. Not the suffocating silence of betrayal, but the calm silence of peace. I am scarred, but I am free. And for the first time in years, I am finally, truly myself.